guys, hope you're well. Well, I'm recording this on Sunday night, and heavy snow is forecast for tonight. So by the time you're watching this, you may have snow everywhere outside your window. Anyway, that's why tonight, no Obi-Wan Kenobi dressing gown, just a heavy fleece. I hope you're keeping warm as well. This week we're on Psalm 23, probably the one psalm that everyone knows. It's so well known. And it's been done so many times by song in many beautiful ways. I just want to say a few comments about this to help you on your way. Again, I'm not going to say too much to destroy your reading of it for yourself, because there's so much richness in there. Again, it's another David psalm written to or by or for or in the style of David. I'm not sure what this preposition means, but there we go. Many people think David wrote it. And it's interesting, it's fitting that it was connected to David. David was actually called himself from being a shepherd. You read the books of 1 Samuel, you'll get the story there. But he was then known afterwards as Israel's shepherd king, called as the youngest son of, I think it was 7 from tending the sheep out in the countryside. He was seen as the least likely, but one after God's own heart. And I think that was really interesting that God chose a shepherd after his own heart, somebody who had that kind of kind and caring and pastoral, and the word pastor actually I think does mean shepherd, that disposition. Anyway, so it's interesting to hear this great shepherd, if this is David speaking, referring to the Lord as being his shepherd. We've got the sense of this great king himself needing to be humbly fed and cared for and protected and led. But behind the shepherd theme is another interesting theme of human purpose. In Genesis 1:26-28, you may be familiar with this. It's where mankind comes on the scene right at the start of the Bible. We read this: "And God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, or the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." So it's interesting. The words subdue and dominion, they sound very sinister to us nowadays. But the original sense of this command is this: go and care for every living thing that's on this earth. And just as I have cared for it, so I desire you to care for them. And it says organize, develop, innovate, care. That's the sense of these words, subdue and have dominion. Use all your ingenuity to make this a place where all life thrives. Just as God brings order and goodness out of chaos right at the start of Genesis, he's saying to the humans, go and do that. This is what subdue and dominion means in this context. It doesn't mean to kind of trample over and have your own way with them. It means actually to care. And it's interesting that from there, one of the first things that Adam goes and does with the animals, and you can read this in Genesis 1 and 2, is he names them. Now that's interesting. There's a science called taxonomy, which is effectively the classifying and naming of animals. And we can ask, why was Adam doing this? Was he just bored? Did he just think this is something to do amongst all of these kind of springs and clouds and rolling hills and stuff? No, he is actually classifying these animals to distinguish them and understand them. I think what he's doing here is he's starting to organize a system whereby he can care for and protect these animals. So right at the start of the Bible, humans are described as something like shepherds, but only because they are made in the image of the super shepherd, the one true shepherd, and that's God himself, that he brings care and food and protection to all living things and not just sheep. And it's interesting that although we are not animals in the same sense, like a cow or a sheep's an animal, we're still a living creature under God's care. So we're also part of his creation. The first 3 chapters of the Bible make it clear that we're not made to be autonomous either. We rely on God's protection, God's care, and God's provision of food, and his guidance not to stray onto the wrong path. So in many ways, it's not a new idea here that God is our shepherd. So when we look through the psalm, we see this is what it tells about God's disposition towards about being a shepherd. It says in verse 2 that we shall lack nothing. It says we shall not want. It just means there's no lack. And the psalm then just goes on to expand on this. In verse 2 it says, we'll lie down in green pastures, and that's food for a sheep. He'll feed us. He'll lead us beside still waters, and running or choppy waters, they would have scared a timid animal like a sheep. So there's protection and safety. He leads us on paths of righteousness. Again, there's guidance there. And it says, when we walk through death's dark valley, so the ideas of death here. He says there's no evil. He says, for your rod and staff will come from me. So what do rod and staff mean? Helpful to understand that the rod is a weapon which fends off other wild animals. So again, it's another symbol of protection. But the staff is a symbol of discipline here, to bring order to the flock, to make sure they don't stray off again. And so that's an interesting theme about God's discipline as well as his protection. So something interesting to talk about there. So really fascinating imagery about the shepherd. However, the shepherd imagery only runs to verse 4. There's another image emerges in verses 5 and 6. We see the signs of a welcoming host. Again, that's fascinating. But more than just a welcoming host, it seems to be some kind of feast that we're being welcomed into, a victory feast. And then there's this description of anointing and an overflowing cup. It seems at the very least there's the signs of a lavish blessing being given to us here. So we go from being sheep who are shepherded to becoming welcomed and honoured guests who are lavished blessing upon us. And it's very interesting, again, that we see anointing. In the Old Testament, anointing was for prophets, priests, or kings. It was a sign of great honour and dignity, like I've said. And again, it was interesting to see the psalm was connected to David, because he was a shepherd called from his role with the sheep to being, and he was anointed by Samuel and being a king. And it's remarkable that this psalm can be spoken by us as well. It can be applied to us. And we can rejoice that we are honoured and accepted and welcomed and then blessed as well. And it's a wonderful surprise to read this in the psalm. But again, you go right back to the start of the Bible, and perhaps it shouldn't be a surprise, because back in the Garden of Eden, we see the first humans, Adam and Eve, as given a kind of royal status. Again, God is presented as king over the whole of creation. However, humans are given a kingly status as well, because we're the image bearers of God. And that means that we are his royal representatives on the earth. And this is exactly why we're being asked to rule, to provide dominion, and to subdue the chaos and disorder of the world. It's because we're to do exactly what the true king is to do. It's almost like mini kings or sub-kings. We're not kings ourselves, but we are kings in the sense that we derive our royalty or our royal status from him. And so this is part of the tragedy of what we see unravel in Genesis 3, the human tragedy, is that we begin to rule outside of his care and outside of his presence. We begin to rule as selfish, almost demigods or autonomous kings. That's never what God intends us to do. So here we have a really interesting statement here of restored honour and dignity in the king's presence in Psalm 23. And the overflowing cup's a picture that we've been given more than we can hold, but not just that, it's more than we deserve as well. So that's two images coming together in this wonderful psalm. And I hope you have a really wonderful time discussing and talking about it together. And I'll just leave you with this thought and encouragement to think about bringing these two images together. The image of God being a shepherd, but also a royal friend who welcomes in and gives us great love and dignity and honour. Enjoy your conversation.